Let's pivot and dig into the Hennessy Utility Fund. Now, this fund tracks the AGA stock index. Josh, what is that index?
Sure. Yeah. So the AGA stock index is comprised of the publicly traded members of the American Gas Association. So there are currently 50 members that are publicly traded, and it's focused on the distribution and transmission of natural gas. So, any member of the AGA that is involved in that would be part of the portfolio. And so it's both utilities as well as what we call energy. And I think it should be emphasized that's more pipelines and LNG exportation and not exploration and production. So ultimately, the AGA stock index is not one that necessarily lives and dies at all by the price of the underlying commodity, which is natural gas.
So Ryan, what is the portfolio construction process of this index and hence the fund?
Yeah, so of those 50 companies that Josh mentioned, essentially this is a market cap weighted index, but it's then modified by the percent that a company is sort of dedicated, exposed to the natural gas side. So you end up lining up all of the companies in the index, market cap weighted. So the biggest ones will be up top and the smallest ones will be down below. You then look at their individual balance sheets to see how much natural gas as a percent of their assets. We call it the gas assets percent. You multiply that times the market cap and you come up with a new weighting. So what happens is a company like One Gas, which may not be as large as some of the other companies on a market cap basis, gets 100% weighting because it's all natural gas. It's a pure play natural gas utility. So it's a higher relative weighting in the index. And then, say a company that's more of a multi-utility that has 80% electricity and only 20% natural gas, that would be a much lower weight if it had the same market cap as One Gas. So that's how it's constructed. It really overweights the natural gas utilities. And then one other thing that we do is make sure that, the index is designed so nothing is greater than 5%. So it caps, I think there are 8 companies currently that hit that 5% level.
Okay. And so is there a predetermined rebalancing schedule for the index?
Sure. Yeah. This is the index is kept by a third-party index provider, and they recalculate it once a month and send over the new weightings if there's any changes in the gas assets or market caps, as well as from time to time you get new companies that come into the index, and then of course acquisitions would mean that companies leave the index.
Yeah. In any sector or subsector limitations for the index?
No, it's the only limitation overall is that 5%. But you end up just owning whatever those companies are that are publicly traded and part of the American Gas Association.
Got it. So Josh, the top 10 holdings of this index make up roughly 50%. As of today, Berkshire Hathaway is the largest holding. How does a company like that end up in an index like this?
Yeah, so it's interesting because Berkshire Hathaway is obviously known more for insurance holdings like Geico and even holdings in furniture and candy and all sorts of various businesses. But Berkshire also owns a unit called Berkshire Energy. So Berkshire Energy is comprised of 11 units. One is, Mid-American Energy, which is a traditional utility. And also they own, the largest interstate gas pipeline in the country, which services 11 states. It's about 14,000 miles of pipeline. So ultimately, when you look at a company as large as Berkshire and look at their balance sheet, it's about 2.5% of the balance sheet is gas assets. And so as Ryan said, the calculation ultimately gets you to a 5% weighting, which is the max. And so Berkshire, as well as 7 others, are at that 5% max weighting.
Interesting. So Ryan, utilities make up about 65% of the index in the fund. Which holding best illustrates why the utility sector is so important?
Sure. I mean, I think you could go with a few, but I'll talk about Duke Energy. DUK is the ticker. This is a company that has both, it's a multi-utility, so it has both electric and natural gas. It's in a fairly good area of the country, North Carolina, South Carolina. It services, many customers there. There's a nice growth component in those markets, and that's always helpful for these utilities because they are constrained geographically where they do business. So you need to have that area growing. But all those are sort of specific to Duke itself. What's more important, and it sort of illustrates where the opportunity is for the overall fund, I'd say, is this push towards renewables, towards the electrification of everything, towards more EVs, stuff we've already talked about. Companies like Duke are going to benefit substantially from that. This is going to happen because they provide the electricity that's needed for all that. Their grid, the grid itself in the United States is way too small for what we're going to need going forward. So to the extent that Duke and other companies are reinvesting, expanding their part of the grid, getting more capacity online, and then of course they also would benefit, as many other companies, with adding in more renewables. If companies can build new power plant or new solar and build new wind farms and do that all through the regulated part of their business, then they're able to pass those costs along to customers and make a 9 to 10 to 11% ROE. So this story right now of a transition in energy in the United States, it's going to benefit many, many, many utilities. And we're talking about decades worth, not just next year or the year after that. So I'd say Duke is a good example of a company that will continue to grow because of this transition.
So Josh, energy makes up about 30% of the index and fund. Which holding in this sector is really the most compelling story for you today?
Yeah, I think, I don't know about compelling, but certainly the most interesting, and we talked about LNG exportation. I would say the most compelling story could be Cheniere Energy. So it's one of the few pure plays on LNG exportation and has been around the longest in that space. So I think, Cheniere is certainly a great proxy for where we are in, the exportation of liquefied natural gas and certainly is front and center in the, the discussion around it. So I would certainly encourage investors to look at that company. I think it's certainly interesting, intellectually, and also, as an investment, it's certainly interesting. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it or not, but it's incredibly interesting and certainly something that we spend a lot of time, looking at.